Welcome to the deep dive. Today we've pulled together, well, an enormous library of biographies, personal notes, essays, and even political manifestos.
All to tackle a pretty monumental task.
Exactly. We are setting out to examine one of the 20th century's greatest acts of radical self-invention.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about the literary giant George Orwell.
No.
We are investigating the methodical destruction and then the complete recreation of the man who was born Eric Arthur Blair.
That's it, precisely. The sources you've gathered, they just show a life defined by this extraordinary, almost unbelievable contradiction.
Right.
I mean, how does a privileged Etonian, someone educated among the sons of the absolute elite, intentionally shed his entire identity to become a chronicler of tramps and coal miners?
And not just that, how does an officer of the Indian Imperial Police become the world's most ferocious and prophetic enemy of totalitarianism?
It doesn't seem possible.
Our mission today is to follow that jagged, really uncomfortable line of transformation. We need to analyze how these pivotal experiences, his controversial start in the colonies, his intentional embrace of, genuine poverty.
And, of course, the trauma of the Spanish Civil War.
Yes. How all of that systematically forced Eric Blair to forge this new identity, to become George Orwell. We need to understand not just the events, but the political and, I guess, the psychological mechanisms that produced his unique, crystal-clear voice.
And we have to, because that voice is still ringing so loudly today. I mean, if you just look at his influence on our language, it's absolutely staggering.
Oh, completely.
Orwellian, Big Brother, Newspeak, doublethink, thought crime, these are not dusty historical terms. They are deeply embedded in our everyday political language.
They really are.
They're evidence of a man who didn't just critique the mid-20th century, he gave us the actual language to critique the 21st.
Okay, let's unpack this transformation, starting right at the very beginning with what you could call the original sin, that essential contradiction, the duality of Eric Arthur Blair. So Eric Arthur Blair was born in 1903, and the place he was born immediately signals this contradiction for a man who would become a champion of English democratic socialism.
Right, Motihari in the Bengal presidency of British India.
He was born right into the heart of the empire he would later dedicate his entire life to dismantling.
And that colonial background, it instantly places him in this really uncomfortable social bracket. The description of his family as being lower upper middle class.
Which is such a brilliant, very English phrase.
It's perfect, isn't it? It's a crucial detail. It means they had the veneer of respectability. The public school education, the professional connections.
But then not the money.
But they lacked the genuine wealth to sustain it. They were perpetually insecure, always anxious about just maintaining appearances.
That economic tension, it just creates the perfect breeding ground for his later class resentment, doesn't it? That feeling of being just slightly on the outside, always looking in at the true elite.
Oh, absolutely. The biographers point out this was a source of profound shame for young Eric. His father, Richard Walmsley Blair, was a sub-deputy opium agent in the Indian Civil Service.
We need to pause on that title.
We really do.
He wasn't just some general civil servant. He was overseeing the production and storage of opium.
Opium destined for sale to China. So the family's income, their respectable middle-class life, was fundamentally underpinned by a morally dubious imperial trade that had created massive addiction and international conflict.
That is a colossal ethical weight on the family's history, whether he really acknowledged it at first or not. And the family roots, they go even further back into that brutal history of empire and inequality.
They do. They connect him directly to the aristocratic foundation of the whole system. His great-great-grandfather, Charles Blair, was a wealthy, slave-owning country gentleman in Jamaica.
Wow.
He had plantations, inherited property, all of it tied to that system. And through marriage, that ancestor connected the Blairs to the landed aristocracy. He married Lady Mary Fane, the daughter of the 8th Earl of Westmoreland.
So even while Eric Blair is growing up with pretty limited means, he's inheriting this extensive history tied to the gentry and the brutal mechanics of colonial exploitation.
He came from the people who ran the system, even if his own family wasn't really benefiting from it at that moment.
This duality, the shame of being the poor relation combined with the guilt of his family's colonial heritage, it must have made his early education just torturous.
It really was. His mother pushed him incredibly hard for a public school education, which they could only get by landing him a scholarship to St. Cyprian School in 1911.
And he was there for 5 years and hated it.
The sources confirm he hated it with a rare intensity.
Not so much hate. Was it just the school itself, or was it him recognizing his sort of inferior social status among his peers?
It was overwhelmingly the latter. His scholarship meant he was always aware that he was on reduced fees, that he came from a less affluent home than the boys around him. He felt the cold sting of social snobbery really keenly. He later detailed all this misery in his powerful, posthumously published essay, Such Were the Joys.
But despite that discomfort, he did well enough academically to win more scholarships. First to Wellington, and then to Eton as a King's Scholar in 1917.
And it's during this time we see the first little flicker of the future nonconformist. The man who was determined to be noticed, even if it meant being awkward.
You're talking about the headstand story.
That adolescent anecdote is just perfect for understanding the future George Orwell. His childhood friend, Jacintha Buddicombe, she recalled finding young Eric standing on his head in a field.
Right, and when she asked why, he gives that instantly memorable answer.
You are noticed more if you stand on your head than if you are right way up. It's an early declaration of intent, isn't it? If the system won't reward me for conforming, I'll subvert conformity just to get some attention.
So he goes to Eton, and he's taught French by Aldous Huxley, of all people.
Incredible.
But he neglects his studies. He seems to deliberately underperform, which prevents him from getting a university scholarship. Why do that? Was it rebellion, or did he just not fit the mold?
It seems to have been a combination of intellectual rebellion and maybe just a bit of financial resignation.
Yeah.
He was brilliant, but he found the curriculum sterile. He had already decided against the traditional scholarly life.
So when he didn't secure the university funding, the choice was basically made for him.
It was. His family couldn't pay for him to go to Oxford or Cambridge. So he went for the next most traditional path for a lower upper middle class boy with a public school education but no money.
The Empire.
The Empire.
So in 1922, at just 19 years old, he joins the Indian Imperial Police in Burma, which was then a province of British India. This phase must have been the ultimate test of that contradiction he was living.
It was the crucible. It absolutely was. He started as an assistant district superintendent, posted in major areas like Mandalay and Youngmia, where he was responsible for the security and order for over 200,000 people.
For a 19-year-old, that level of responsibility is staggering.
He had genuine power over the lives of hundreds of thousands of people.
And that power immediately forced him to confront the colonial machine from the inside.
Yes, and the experience was deeply corrosive for him. He wasn't just an observer, he was the physical embodiment of the oppressor. He recalled the psychological torture of the role.
I remember the quote.
He said he was stuck between my hatred of the empire I served and my rage against the evil-spirited little beasts who tried to make my job impossible.
Wow. So he hates the system he's policing, but he also feels the hostility from the people he's supposed to be managing. It's a complete no-win situation.
And it bred enormous internal guilt and conflict.
It's during this time that he makes this fascinating attempt to physically integrate himself with the culture he was policing.
That's right. Alongside adopting the pencil mustache that all the British officers favored, he got these small, untidy, blue, circular tattoos on his knuckles.
And these weren't just decorative.
No, not at all. They were associated with beliefs in rural Burma that they could protect the wearer against bullets and snake bites. This simple act is so symbolic. Here's the imperial officer seeking magical protection from the very people he is suppressing.
It shows this early, yearning attempt to reject his own class identity and embrace the local culture, even if it's just superstitious, a way of saying, I am not one of them, even while he's wearing their uniform.
Exactly. So by 1927, he's on leave in England, suffering from dengue fever, and the internal conflict just reaches a breaking point.
He reappraises his entire life and makes the single most important non-writing decision he ever made.
He resigns from the Indian Imperial Police. He chose to abandon a stable, respectable, powerful career to pursue the utterly precarious life of a writer. And his very first act as a newly minted writer was to draw on this trauma for his major works.
Burmese Days and those incredible essays.
The searing essays, a hanging and shooting an elephant, which just brutally dissect the moral decay of imperialism. He knew he had to cleanse himself of the name Eric Blair, the colonial officer, to earn the right to speak honestly about power.
And that necessity, that need for a clean slate, brings us to the most deliberate phase of his self-creation. So after resigning from the police, Blair doesn't just settle down to write a novel. Instead, he embarks on what you can only really call an active, almost masochistic period of self-degradation. A deliberate immersion into the absolute lowest strata of society in London and Paris.
This wasn't just research for a book. It was a psychological purification. He was trying to wash off the guilt of Burma by intentionally subjecting himself to the exact conditions of exploitation and anonymity that define the underclass.
And he was very inspired by Jack London.
Oh, heavily. Specifically, London's investigative journalism and the people of the abyss. Blair went native in his own city, dressing in rags, sleeping rough, and even adopting the temporary pseudonym P.S. Burton during these intermittent sorties into the London East End.
How deep did this immersion actually go? He wasn't just observing. He was really experiencing the systemic cruelty of poverty.
He was fully exposed to the elements, to the hunger, to the bureaucratic indifference. This experience yielded his first published essay in English, The Spike, which is this uncompromising look at sleeping in a tramp workhouse.
And of course, it formed the basis of his first book, Down and Out in Paris and London.
Yes. The sources highlight that poverty, in all its forms, it became his obsessive subject right up until he experienced the Spanish Civil War.
He didn't just limit this baptism by fire to England either. He moved to Paris in 1928.
Right, supported in part by his aunt, Lélie Limousin. He was trying to write fiction, but again, it's the poverty and the journalism that defined the period. He lived in the working class, Fifth arrondissement, publishing articles about unemployment and the grim realities of London beggars.
But the key experience in Paris, again, it involved physical suffering.
He did. You're talking about his serious illness in 1929.
Yeah.
He fell gravely ill and was taken to the Hôpital Cochin, a free teaching hospital. There, he was subjected to public medical examinations in front of students and witnessed the callous, dehumanizing treatment of the poor.
And that firsthand trauma was so intense that years later in 1946, he wrote the essay, How the Poor Die.
A brutal critique of hospital indifference that came directly from this one experience. After he recovered and had all his money stolen, he took on the most menial jobs dishwashing in a fashionable hotel on the Rue de Rivoli, which provides that famous, vivid material for Down and Out.
So he returns to Southwold, back to his parents' house in late 1929, and he's cycling between this respectable life as an aspiring author and his tramping expeditions. He keeps up this double life for years.
He was straddling two worlds and trying desperately to collapse the distance between them. There's that fascinating, almost pathological desire to experience the absolute worst of it.
He even tried to get arrested.
Deliberately tried to get arrested just to experience Christmas in prison. He got drunk and disorderly, but the authorities just released him after 2 days. They decided his offense wasn't serious enough for jail time.
He was desperately seeking the moral authority of a true outcast, and the state wouldn't even grant him that.
Right. And this inherent tension, the privileged observer trying to become the thing he observes, is precisely why he needed the pen name.
So avoiding family embarrassment was the main driver for creating George Orwell.
It was a practical necessity, yes. The sources say he needed to avoid embarrassing the respectable Blair family of Southwold over his identity as a tramp when Down and Out was about to be published in 1933.
But it seems deeper than that.
Oh, it was. Symbolically, it was the final deliberate shedding of the imperial self. Eric Arthur Blair was the name tied to the opium agent and the Etonian past. George Orwell was born of the English landscape and the English common man.
Let's break down the name choice itself. George is pretty straightforward.
The patron saint of England, right? But Orwell.
The significance there.
The River Orwell flows through Suffolk, an area he really loved. By choosing George Orwell, he gave himself what he called a good, round English name. He was patriotic, earthy, anchored in common culture, unlike the slightly rarefied Anglo-Indian sound of Eric Blair.
It was a complete rebranding, a name that, just by its sound, demands clear, honest English prose.
Unmarred by foreign or class pretension.
Okay. So Down and Out is published in January 1933. The transformation is publicly complete, but financially, he's still precarious. How did he support himself while writing his early novels?
He took up teaching, which was another deeply awkward fit for him. He taught at two small schools, the Hawthorns and later Frey's College. He was simultaneously writing Burmese Days and A Clergyman's Daughter. It offered just enough stability, but it was fraught with difficulty.
And once again, his health intervenes and forces another career change.
He caught a severe chill during a motorcycle trip, which rapidly developed into pneumonia. He was hospitalized in January 1934 and never returned to the classroom. This constant cycle of sickness and recovery really defined his life.
And it's important to remember that this fragile health was constantly pushing him to work harder, wasn't it? Like he was racing against time.
Absolutely. By 1935, he's working at a secondhand bookshop in Hampstead, Book Lovers Corner. And this provided a rich backdrop for his fiction.
Yes, that part-time job gave him free mornings to write and the vivid, claustrophobic atmosphere for his 1936 novel, keep the aspidistra flying.
Crucially, the shop owners introduced him to this wider radical intellectual circle, including members of the Independent Labor Party, the ILP. He was politically awakening, but still defining his terms.
The ultimate political commitment, though, that came from a commission, Victor Gollancz asked him to investigate social conditions in the depressed north of England.
And this led to his most famous piece of investigative journalism, The Road to Wigan Pier. This commission in 1936 was the final stage of his transition from just a writer about poverty to a writer committed to systematic social change.
It's fascinating that he sought advice from a working-class author, Jack Hilton.
Yes, and Hilton told him explicitly to go to Wigan rather than Rochdale, saying, "For there are the colliers and their good stuff." Orwell took that advice to heart.
He immersed himself completely, staying in these extremely poor lodgings above a tripe shop and even going down the Bryn Hall coal mine, which was a deeply traumatic, physically challenging experience for him.
And the resulting book, published in 1937, caused an immediate sensation because of its structure.
The structure is so key to understanding his intellectual journey.
It is. The first half is pure, uncompromising reportage on the horrifying conditions of factory and mine life he saw across Lancashire and Yorkshire. But the second half is the polemical breakthrough.
A searing essay about his own class background, his hatred of the nasty little Etonian snob he used to be, and this passionate, often cranky argument for democratic socialism.
Gollancz, who's publishing it for the Left Book Club, was terrified of this second half.
He was deeply nervous.
He added a disculpatory preface because he was worried that Orwell's blunt criticism of the middle-class intellectual left, who were the primary readers of the Left Book Club, would offend his audience.
Orwell was already the outsider, wasn't he? Unwilling to conform even to the standards of his own political allies.
Exactly. And the state noticed. It's a hugely important detail that his meticulous investigation into the working class and his increasingly socialist views led to him being placed under surveillance by the special branch, starting in 1936.
The irony is just immense. Before 1984 was even conceived, the man who would define the term Big Brother was already being watched by the British security apparatus.
Simply for caring too much about the poor and expressing inconvenient political truths.
So if Burma gave Eric Blair the guilt of the empire, then Spain gave George Orwell the mission of his life. He married Eileen O'Shaughnessy in June 1936, and by the end of that year, he felt compelled to go and fight in the Spanish Civil War on the Republican side against Franco's uprising.
And his decision about who to join was critical. He deliberately refused to commit to the Communist Party's international brigades, who were aligned with the Soviet Union, until he had assessed the situation firsthand.
Instead, he used his contacts within the Independent Labor Party, the ILP, to join the POUM militia,
the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification in Barcelona.
This choice, POUM over the international brigades, was the ideological fault line that defined the rest of his career, wasn't it? We should probably clarify for you what the POUM actually represented.
Absolutely. The POUM was a smaller anti-Stalinist communist group. It drew on Trotskyist and anarcho-syndicalist traditions. They emphasized revolutionary purity and worker control.
And the international brigades.
By contrast, they were controlled by the highly disciplined pro-Soviet Communist Party. When Orwell arrived, he found the Aragon Front, where POUM was stationed, was defined by camaraderie and this surprising egalitarianism, but also by extreme deprivation.
The sources describe a shocking lack of supplies.
Oh, it was a world away from the organized, propaganda-fueled vision of revolutionary war. He was shocked by the shortages of food, firewood, basic supplies, and crucially reliable munitions.
He became a corporal pretty quickly.
Yes, not because he was a natural soldier, but because his earlier police and cadet corps training gave him organizational skills that none of the other men had. Meanwhile, his wife, Eileen, she followed him, volunteering at the ILP office in Barcelona.
And bringing him luxuries like English tea and chocolate, a little piece of England in the revolutionary chaos.
Exactly. But the real shock, the political trauma that became the intellectual foundation for 1984, that came when he returned to Barcelona in 1937.
The May Days.
This was the May Days. Factional fighting erupted between the various Republican groups. The pro-Soviet Communist Party, seeking to consolidate its power, launched this devastating organized propaganda campaign against the POUM and the anarcho-syndicalists.
And they didn't just disagree with them.
No, they launched a campaign of wholesale, systematic lies and distortion, accusing the POUM of collaborating with fascists.
This firsthand experience of state-sanctioned lying, of witnessing history being rewritten instantly by the very people who were supposed to be his allies, that was the turning point.
It was his political watershed. He wasn't betrayed by Franco's fascists. He was betrayed by the supposedly revolutionary left. This systematic distortion of truth and history, it cemented his commitment to democratic socialism and made him the fierce, uncompromising anti-Stalinist prophet he became.
He later wrote about this period.
He said he had seen wonderful things and at last really believe in socialism, which I never did before. It was the purity of the communal spirit he saw on the front line, coupled with the dirty, murderous politics in the back offices that gave him that clarity.
That moment must have been terrifyingly disorienting. I mean, how did he react when he realized the people he was fighting alongside were suddenly accusing him of being a fascist collaborator?
The biographers note he reacted with this bitter, lucid sarcasm. When a communist friend approached him after the fighting, asking if he still planned to join the international brigades.
What did he say?
Orwell expressed genuine shock, noting that, according to the communist press, he was already listed as a fascist agent. That ability to observe and instantly articulate the absurdity of the lie, that's classic Orwell.
Unfortunately, his time on the front line was cut brutally short right after this trauma.
He returned to the front, but because of his unusual height, he was 6'2", he was warned that he stood out significantly above the trench parapet.
And in May 1937, he was shot.
Shot in the throat by a sniper's bullet.
That's an agonizing detail. How close was he to death?
The sources confirmed the bullet missed his main artery by the barest margin. The injury was severe, and it permanently damaged his voice. He was treated in a hospital in Leyte and was eventually declared medically unfit for service.
And in a strange, terrifying way, that injury might have saved his life.
It may well have.
Yeah.
Because the political purge was already underway.
Right. The PUM was outlawed.
And its members were being arrested. His commander, George Cobb, was jailed. Orwell and Eileen had to go into hiding, lying low in Barcelona under constant threat of arrest. A deposition was filed, charging them with rabid Trotskyism.
Given his health, if he had been caught and imprisoned, he probably wouldn't have survived.
No, they had to escape Spain by train. It was an act of sheer political desperation, fleeing the very system they had volunteered to save.
That double escape from colonialism in Burma and now from totalitarianism in Spain, that was the final political education. And the result was Homage to Catalonia, published in 1938.
A commercially disastrous book at first, but intellectually vital. Its publication confirmed his transition from a writer about poverty to a writer about political integrity and the necessity of confronting lies.
And it's chilling to know that later Soviet files confirmed that both George and Eileen were being spied on in Barcelona in May 1937.
The paranoia and distortion he wrote about was absolutely real.
Back in England, he found his nuanced views on the Civil War were highly unpopular among the intellectual left, who were still broadly pro-Soviet.
Yes. His publisher Gollancz and even Kingsley Martin rejected several of his subsequent works. This intellectual ostracization just reinforced his identity as the necessary outsider, the independent voice.
He eventually found a sympathetic publisher in Frederick Warburg of Secker and Warburg.
A relationship that would prove vital for his later masterpieces. But during this time, his health declined severely. He spent time in Preston Hall Sanatorium. A generous friend secretly funded a trip for the Orwells to French Morocco to escape the English winter, where he wrote the novel Coming Up for Air, published in 1939, the same year his father died.
As World War II began, Orwell, who is still recovering and officially declared unfit for any kind of military service
because of his throat injury and his lung issues.
Right. He found this unique way to reconcile his socialism with patriotism.
He embraced what he called revolutionary patriotism. Unlike many on the left, he passionately believed that England, its culture, its common decency, was worth defending against fascism, but that the defense had to be underpinned by a socialist revolution.
So he joined the Home Guard.
Yes, teaching street fighting and fortifications. He saw it as a revolutionary people's militia, not just a traditional defense force.
And this political synthesis was beautifully articulated in his 1941 work, The Lion and the Unicorn.
That work is so vital because it explains the unique path of democratic socialism he was advocating. It's an attempt to marry the core values of English culture, fair play, love of nature, a sense of humor, with a genuinely socialist political framework.
It was a call to arms for the English left, telling them to stop viewing patriotism as exclusively a right-wing concept.
Exactly. This period also saw him working directly for the establishment he so often criticized, the BBC's Eastern Service from 1941 to 1943.
How did the fiercely independent Orwell cope with being a propagandist?
It was a deeply conflicted role. His job was to supervise cultural broadcasts to India, to counter Nazi propaganda. He had Vinu Chitale as his secretary. It was a constant exercise in intellectual compromise.
He felt he was fighting the good fight against Hitler,
But doing so under the banner of an empire he despised. He resigned in 1943 because he felt the work was fruitless, and reports confirmed his fears. Almost no Indians were actually listening. He needed to free up his time for what became his defining political statement.
The masterpiece he began writing in 1943, following his mother's death, was, of course, Animal Farm.
This was the direct fictionalized attack on Stalinism, using the allegory of animals taking over a farm to critique the degeneration of the Soviet Revolution into a totalitarian tyranny run by the pigs.
It was a political hand grenade aimed squarely at what he saw as the greatest intellectual dishonesty of his time.
Western intellectuals justifying Stalin's atrocities.
And it was almost universally rejected when he finished it.
The rejection story is an absolute masterpiece of Orwellian irony. It perfectly demonstrates the intellectual cowardice and political blindness he was always writing about. Because the Soviet Union was a key WWII ally, his critique was considered unpatriotic.
So Victor Galens refused it.
T.S. Eliot, at Faber and Faber, rejected it, arguing that the critique was unsound because the pigs weren't presented as being sufficiently good to run the farm.
But the most shocking rejection involved actual state interference.
Yes. Jonathan Cape initially agreed to publish it, but then reversed his decision after a visit from a man named Peter Smollett from the Ministry of Information.
And Smollett was later identified.
Years after Orwell's death, as a Soviet agent, a Soviet spy successfully blocked the publication of the most important anti-Soviet literary work of the age.
It's the ultimate confirmation of the very mechanism of deceit he was fighting against.
It confirmed his darkest suspicions about the extent of totalitarian influence within Western liberal institutions. It was only published in August 1945 by Secker and Warburg, after the war had ended, and the political necessity of praising Uncle Joe Stalin had evaporated.
And it was an instant worldwide success. It finally gave Orwell the financial stability and the cultural platform he had struggled for his entire life.
It did. But amidst this sudden literary success, he suffered a profound personal tragedy. In 1944, he and Eileen adopted a son, Richard Horatio Blair. But in March 1945, Eileen died unexpectedly.
It was a terrible, sudden loss.
She died from an allergic reaction to the anesthetic during a hysterectomy while he was away as a war correspondent. Despite being a man who was often awkward and emotionally reserved, Orwell was absolutely determined not to give up Richard. He raised the boy largely as a single father.
Insisting Richard accompany him everywhere, treating him almost like a mini-adult.
Right, but the shadow of his illness prevented him from being a completely physically affectionate father.
That's a heartbreaking detail.
His son Richard later discovered that Orwell was terrified of passing on his undiagnosed tuberculosis to him, and this fear caused him to avoid common physical closeness, no hugging or kissing. Even his devotion was filtered through the constant danger of his own failing health.
So, seeking refuge and stability for his writing, he moved in 1946 to this fiercely remote location.
Barnhill, a primitive, abandoned farmhouse on the island of Jura in the Inner Hebrides.
And this remote, beautiful but desperately difficult location became the birthplace of his great dystopian novel. He began writing 1984 on Jura.
But the isolation and the rugged lifestyle just compounded his already severe health problems. He nearly died in 1947 during a disastrous boating accident in the Gulf of Corryvreckan, which left him soaked and worsened his existing condition.
And the tuberculosis diagnosis was confirmed soon after.
He was hospitalized and received streptomycin treatment, which was a new cutting-edge drug at the time, imported with the help of his close friend, the editor David Astor.
But the treatment had to be stopped.
Tragically, yes. It was discontinued because he developed toxic epidermal necrolysis, a very rare and severe side effect. He struggled on, though, driven by the urgency of getting his message out.
He finished the manuscript of 1984 in December 1948, despite being critically weak. It was published in June 1949 to immediate and widespread critical acclaim.
It instantly shaped the political consciousness of the Cold War.
It was a race against the clock. His final months were spent in and out of hospitals, yet they included a controversial final act, a second marriage in 1949 to Sonia Barnell in his hospital room.
This marriage remains deeply scrutinized by biographers.
It does.
Sonia Brownell was believed by some of his friends to be the model for Julia, the pragmatic, sexually liberated protagonist of 1984. The controversy stems from the timing. Some friends felt Sonia was primarily attracted to his new fame and financial success. It added this layer of ambiguity to a man who craved moral clarity.
He died soon after, aged only 46, on January 21st, 1950.
From a pulmonary artery rupture related to his tuberculosis. And here is the final, poignant contradiction in his life. Despite being a lifelong atheist and a fierce critic of the church, he requested an Anglican burial.
His friend David Astor arranged for him to be interred at All Saints Church in Sutton Courtenay, Oxfordshire.
The champion of the dispossessed, the secular socialist who sought moral truth and humanism, was buried with Anglican rites, far away from the tramps and colliers of London.
When we look back at Orwell's career today, we remember him for two novels, Animal Farm and 1984. But as we've discussed, during his lifetime, he was equally, if not more, valued for his nonfiction.
Oh, absolutely. His journalism and his essay writing.
They were his weekly sermon on clarity and decency.
That's a good way to put it. Down-and-out Whig and peer and homage to Catalonia established his moral authority. Literary critics still debate whether he was a great novelist, but they all agree he was the best English essayist since Hazlitt, perhaps since Dr. Johnson.
He had that unmatched ability to weave personal anecdote with profound social commentary.
He really did.
Let's briefly revisit his intellectual ancestry. Who influenced this unique voice?
Well, he had a deep appreciation for the great satirists and realists. Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels was one of the 6 books he famously said he would save if all others were destroyed.
He admired Dickens greatly.
Yes, characterizing him as a 19th century liberal whose outrage fueled social change. Though he did criticize Dickens for lacking a truly revolutionary program. We mentioned Jack London's influence on his investigative work.
And politically, Arthur Koestler was very important to him.
Especially Darkness at Noon. That book gave him crucial anti-Stalinist insight into the mechanics of totalitarian confession and show trials, which he felt Western intellectuals were far too eager to justify or just dismiss.
This constant frustration with the dishonesty of his intellectual peers led to his most lasting and, I think, practical contribution, defining the power of language as a political tool.
We have to talk about his seminal 1946 essay, Politics in the English Language.
It's the cornerstone of his entire anti-totalitarian philosophy.
It is. He argued that vague, sloppy, or euphemistic writing isn't just a sign of poor style. It's a direct tool of political manipulation. He believed clear thinking was impossible without clear language.
If you can't describe political cruelty in concrete terms, it becomes easier to defend the indefensible.
Exactly. To make murder sound like pacification or imprisonment sound like re-education.
He provided a framework for writers seeking to resist this intellectual rot, his famous 6 rules. Let's not just list them, but explore the political consequence of actually following them.
The rules are simple, yet they're radically political. The first, never use a long word where a short one will do, is a direct attack on academic pretension and jargon that seeks to obfuscate reality.
Right. And the second, if it's possible to cut a word out, always cut it out.
That demands ruthless conciseness, forcing the writer to strip away the padding that disguises bad ideas. The third, never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print.
This demands originality. It forces the writer to see the world anew, rather than relying on cliches that have been drained of all meaning. By demanding we avoid stale phrases, he forces us to confront reality directly.
Exactly. The fourth, never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent, continues his demand for clarity and accessibility.
The fifth is an ethical check. Never use the passive voice where you can use the active.
And the passive voice is the political tool of deflection, isn't it? Mistakes were made, rather than, I made mistakes. He demanded responsibility.
And the final rule, his safety valve.
Break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. It emphasizes that the meaning and the truth always come first, even over strict style. It's a plea for unvarnished truth in the face of political expediency.
And this precision allowed him to create an entire language of political critique that entered the lexicon instantly with 1984.
The list of neologisms is the physical proof of his prophetic vision. We need to remember what each of these terms actually means. Newspeak isn't just simplified language.
No, it's a language specifically engineered to make independent or rebellious thought literally impossible because the words needed to express those thoughts have been eliminated.
Right, and doublethink is that terrifying mental state of holding two contradictory beliefs simultaneously, or knowing a lie is a lie, yet believing it to be true because the party wills it.
We use terms like thought police, room 101, and the memory hole all the time today. They're shortcuts to describing totalitarian control.
They're powerful, immediate metaphors for surveillance, customized torture, and the disappearance of inconvenient history. It's extraordinary that Orwell didn't just diagnose the problem. He gave us the diagnostic tools.
And his influence extends beyond 1984. He even coined the defining term for the geopolitical tension that emerged right after World War II.
The sources confirm he may have been the first person to use the term Cold War.
Yes, in his 1945 essay, You and the Atom Bomb.
He used it to describe a permanent, terrifying state of tension between unconquerable states armed with atomic weapons, a world defined by ideological conflict and proxy battles, which precisely described the next 50 years of global history.
Despite this public clarity and fierce moral vision, his personal character remains intensely contradictory, doesn't it? Fueling ongoing biographical debates. He was noted for being both deeply loyal and profoundly awkward.
He maintained very close, lifelong friendships, typically with people who shared his cultural background. Yet he was profoundly ungregarious in public, especially with the people he was trying to champion.
There's that anecdote from his brother-in-law's local pub.
Right, where the landlord banned Orwell, saying, "Don't bring that bugger in here again." He was intellectually committed to the working class, but often looked physically out of place, even intimidating, in their presence.
He also embraced, consciously or not, a reputation as an English eccentric.
He was a gangling figure, physically awkward. One friend noted he was awfully likely to knock things off tables. His behavior was certainly peculiar at times.
The story of him slurping tea out of a saucer at the BBC canteen.
Or expecting a working-class guest at his home to dress for dinner, even in the middle of a war. It was this mix of excessive politeness and odd social conduct that cemented his reputation.
And his views on religion are another source of contradiction.
He explicitly identified as an atheist and a humanist. He was a robust critic of organized Christianity. Yet, those closest to him noted he maintained a deeply ingrained religiosity.
He would attend Church of England Holy Communion.
Despite his non-belief, he wrote about feeling mean to go to HCC when one doesn't believe, but he kept up the practice. He married twice in the Church of England and requested an Anglican burial. He rejected the dogma, but he clearly missed the structure and moral weight of the faith.
Finally, we have to look at his curious obsession with the details of the common man's lifestyle, including very specific culinary tastes. It's a reflection of his focus on material reality.
His focus extended to the essential comforts of the English worker. The pub, fish and chips, the radio, football. He had incredibly specific tastes, appreciating English beer, but famously despising drinkers of lager.
He was a true tea fanatic.
Absolutely. Even having high-quality Fortnum Mason's tea brought to him in Catalonia during the Civil War.
And his essay, A Nice Cup of Tea, isn't just some charming piece. It's a testament to his demand for precision in all things.
It includes 11 incredibly detailed rules for making tea. The most controversial rule, which divides the nation to this day, is his insistence on putting the milk in first.
To regulate the amount exactly.
He argued it was the only way. He applied the same precision to tea making as he applied to dismantling political propaganda.
And we have that charming yet politically illustrative anecdote of the rejected essay on British food.
Yes, in 1946 he was commissioned by the British Council to write an essay on British cookery to promote international relations. Orwell, being Orwell, described the typical British diet as a simple, rather heavy, perhaps slightly barbarous diet.
And because of the extreme post-war austerity and rationing, the British Council refused to publish it.
They were worried it would embarrass the country. They officially issued an apology when the essay and the rejection letter were discovered in 2019. Even his thoughts on stew and tripe were too truthful for the state to tolerate. #outro.
So we have traced the radical, methodical transformation of Eric Blair, the privileged but impoverished imperial officer, into George Orwell, the fiercely independent democratic socialist.
His commitment to truth was born from the trauma of the Bernese Empire and cemented by the political betrayal he witnessed in Spain.
His prose prioritized clear, unvarnished truth over all forms of intellectual obfuscation, making his life, quite literally, a decades-long fight against totalitarian systems and their agents.
And yet, as he became the public face of anti-totalitarianism, the systems he fought never stopped watching him. We've established that the special branch maintained a file on him for decades.
With one investigator even noting that Orwell's tendency to dress in bohemian fashion was proof of his advanced communist fears.
That surveillance forms the perfect backdrop for the final, staggering irony our source material reveals. The man the British state watched as a potential revolutionary was simultaneously working for the state.
In 1949, near death and still acutely sensitive to the danger of communist infiltration, Orwell gave Celia Kirwan, who was working for a Foreign Office unit established for anti-communist propaganda, a confidential list.
The Information Research Department.
Exactly. And this list contained the names of writers, journalists, and intellectuals he deemed unsuitable for anti-communist propaganda because of their pro-communist or pro-Soviet leanings.
This is where the complexity truly explodes. Orwell, the man who despised doublethink and valued transparency above all, was helping the Foreign Office filter communist sympathizers.
While being watched by MI5 for his own socialist politics, all after a Soviet agent had successfully blocked his greatest work.
It raises the ultimate question for you to consider. How much did the fight against one terrifying form of totalitarianism, Stalinism, push the great prophet of moral clarity toward the necessary yet deeply compromising realpolitik of the Western system he had also spent his life critiquing?
Did the lifelong quest for moral purity ultimately require an act of intellectual compromise? It leaves us with a necessary discomfort, proving that even the saint of common decency lived in shades of gray.